All right. So this is June 14th, OpEdNews Zoom session. Hello. And to those who logged on last minute, I'm really beat. I was down the shore. I went to Avalon in South Jersey, and I got a lot of sun, and it just knocks me out.
Well, you got outside. That was a good thing.
Yeah, well, I get out almost every day. I mean, at least 4 or 5 days a week, I'm running in the park or walking.
That's good.
Yeah. And we figured out how to do it so we hardly see anybody. We just stay off the paved trails.
That's cool. Do we have a topic?
Anybody?
I heard that we're all going to be vaccinated this October.
Yeah.
For yourself.
Say more.
And it's the October surprise, you know.
I read that half the population is not planning on getting vaccinated.
You heard that.
Yeah. And then I also heard that Bill Gates and others plan to make billions of dollars forcing us to be vaccinated and chipped.
And chipped. Oh.
I guess RFI chips or something.
There's no vaccination.
Well, that doesn't mean that people can't anticipate that the New World Order is going to force everybody to have
There's no vaccine.
What I understand, there's about 120 vaccine candidates right now.
Well, you could say that, but there are 120 projects with much grant money being thrown at them by the administration. That's not the same thing as to say they're candidates.
Some are in phase 1, some are in phase 2, and some are going into 2 and 3 at the same time. But I guess the most promising ones are Moderna and or something. But you know, nobody's made a vaccine for coronavirus ever. So I agree, it's certainly a long shot, to say the least. And who knows what side effects will come out of it. I would be very cautious personally before I took any vaccine that along those lines, especially an RNA modified.
And let's not forget that Trump has given a mandate to the FDA to just fuck off, basically, and not do any kind of criteria, not do any kind of requirements. It's Wild West out there.
Oh, that's in keeping with all.
I'm going to stuff my face with crackers and cheese. That's probably the most useful contribution I can make to this discussion.
And you're not passing the plate around?
Oh, here you go.
Yeah, I like that.
Oh, hi, Kitty.
Hi, Kitty. Hi, guys. Scott, I've been wanting to get in touch with you about making a presentation here in the Woodstock area on public banking.
Oh. Well, it would have to be virtual. I don't have a car, for one thing, and of course, we're all sort of quarantined anyway. But
It's not going to be over.
I can point you to videos of old presentations too, which are not that, so that might be helpful as well. And also, we have a manual about public banking as well, 20-page, how to start a public bank. So that might help you actually get started.
Well, good. So how can I contact you outside of this meeting?
I'll put my email in the chat box, and then you can email me.
Terrific.
Drew, welcome back.
So I have a question for Scott. So Scott.
This is North Liberty Airport, North Liberty Airport. Please watch your step. I'm exiting the train. This is North Liberty Airport.
No, you got to mute yourself, Josh, if you're traveling with that noise behind you, please.
Josh has arrived.
I'm sorry. I have to figure out how to mute.
I'll mute you, Josh, and you can unmute yourself. Okay. You had a question, Marilyn?
Yeah, I'm not even sure what it is, but it's for Scott. So Scott, I've been just wondering, is there anything that you see in the current economic situation that you feel like would push things towards, the kinds of things that you're promoting and believing?
Well, in New York, actually, there is a bill in terms of public banking from State Senator James Sanders. And he's actually been trying to push public banking for about half a decade. And he had a previous bill, but now he has a new bill, which is better than the other one. It would actually set up a real state bank, not just a commission to study it. So he's very serious. I've been on a few calls, not just with him, but a whole group of people, with activists, about 10 or 20 of us, and from different groups. And it seems to be getting more momentum than it used to. And he's on the finance committee as well, so he's well positioned to get it forward. As far as my other interest in land value taxation, unfortunately, I think that's a lot less probable, although the call I was just on was actually from the people who promote that, and they say that there are several towns upstate of New York that are interested in land value taxation. So that may actually get more momentum individually in those little towns.
So,
can you say what land value taxation is?
Yeah, basically that's taxing the value of the land, but not any improvements upon it. So therefore, if people are hoarding land or speculating on land, they're discouraged from doing that because they're paying more tax than they do now. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the situation is often the case where you have vacant land that is taxed much more lightly than built upon land, and therefore nobody bothers to develop it, and you're actually penalized when you do develop it because your tax goes up on that property. So it's actually reverse of what we want. If we want people to have more housing and so forth, we want to get that land into production. And what this also does is untax the improvements, and so you get more buildings, you get more factories or whatever within the zoning, confines and considerations of the community and that sort of thing. But that's true anyway. But
Is this Henry George's idea?
What if you want green space preserved?
So that comes up. That question comes up a lot. So basically, people do pay more to live near parks. Our Central Park in New York City is a prime example of that. People pay a high amount just to live in that park. So actually, it's very valuable land. It would not be the case that every little parcel would be developed. People actually want to leave that land as a park and will pay more to have it that way.
And there are also land conservancy groups too, that where people give the land or at least give the rights to the land in the future to these conservancy organizations that some of them hold thousands of acres that way.
Yeah, well, that's another way, but this is a way of keeping it economically viable without having to rely on the largesse of government, which, as we know, is very fickle, to put it mildly.
Scott,
this is self-sustaining.
Scott, you mentioned that a state bank, it might be possible in New York. That would surprise me because Wall Street is right in New York, and you'd think they would have a huge amount of power with
They
the
do.
legislation.
So New York City, ironically, or maybe because of that, actually is the great supply of support for a state bank, or for that matter, a New York City bank. We could have one in the city. We could have one in each borough, frankly, which would be bigger in each borough than the Bank of North Dakota, which is our 100-year-old example of a state bank right now. So we have a lot of support. There's a couple of groups. I'm in Public Banking Institute. I've been in that for 10 years. I'm a senior advisor there. There's also another group, a Public Banking Coalition, which is actually much larger, but honestly, it has a lot of people with a lot of different causes in it. I was on a call on that recently, and everybody had a few minutes to speak on their individual cause, and it didn't have much to do with public banking. But at least it's a coalition of people who support that in addition to what their primary cause is. So we are getting support from that as well. And Senator James Sanders is supporting that. Actually, Senator Bernie Sanders supports public banking too. He was on Rob's radio show and actually endorsed it too. So
Washington State is trying to get a state bank, but it hasn't happened yet.
right. So there's an 84-page bill which I really have to read. The public banking people want me to read it and to comment on that bill. So there is a bill in Washington State to set up a state bank, and it's Senator. I can't pronounce his name right. I think it's Hayagawa or something like that.
Bob Hasegawa.
Hasegawa. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's been trying to get a state bank in Washington State for a long time, and he's well known to the Public Banking Institute, and he has a bill, and it's probably worth going through.
When it comes to public banking, the coronavirus situation has made public banking even more attractive. Every major urban area, probably every county is struggling now with tax revenues because everything's slowed down, and they don't have the money to pay for stuff. And if you have a public bank, you have more money and you have less expenses. So it's the best time ever for people to be pushing and adopting public banking.
Yeah, and let me just kind of modify that a little bit in a good way. There is actually more money than people think, because there are a number of rainy day funds, there are pension funds, there are government funds that are liquid, things that the government, local governments invest in, that are on Wall Street or on even hedge funds or short funds or private equity. Or I know because I've looked at all of these. And
is it your book?
Yeah, I have a book. I have a book called America is Not Broke, which Rob knows about. He wrote a recommendation for it and the forward, actually. And I talk about that. It's one chapter in it about public banking. And there's another chapter in it about where to get the money for public banking, which basically you can determine if you look at the comprehensive annual financial reports on any local government entity, whether it's a city, county, state, or even your local fire department. They all have these CAFRs. So you can find out exactly how much money and where that money is invested. And then, you can recommend to your legislature to reinvest it in a more productive local economy. This is not a red or blue issue. This is a lot of conservatives are for this too, because it returns control to the local economy, and that way they don't have to depend on Washington, and they don't have to depend on big banks, which they may not trust either. A lot of conservatives don't trust the big banks either. So we find we get across the board support from all kinds of political persuasions, and of course the biggest example of all is in North Dakota, which is a red state, and they've had a public bank for over 100 years, going back to 1919. And, they went through the crisis of 2008 and 9, only state in the country to do so with a budget surplus. So, there was no other state that had a budget surplus. And one of the reasons they had it is because their public bank made a special dividend to the state when they needed it, and basically kept them in the black. The oil revenues, that's not that, because that cratered then as it did this time. And so they were able to ride that out because they had the public bank to support them.
So Scott, I'm trying to, I have a little bit of an idea, but or Rob, either one, I'm trying to understand what it is exactly about the pandemic situation that helps make public banking more attractive.
Well, you want to take that, Robert? Sorry.
Here in Philadelphia, all right, we got some noise. This has to stop. Okay, so
sounds like you're dropping anchor.
Yeah, Philly, they're struggling about where they're going to pay for education. The taxes from businesses are really down, and that's all over the place. And so one way that brings in more money is Public banks. Public banks do financing. Public banks make interest. Public banks take care of money that is usually given to big banks that charge, literally charge to manage the money. So if, like Scott mentioned, the rainy day fund, that could be billions of dollars for the biggest cities. And they may have one of the big banks charge them to keep that money there. They may not get any interest at all. It's crazy. So instead, if they put that money into a public bank, all of a sudden all the charges go away and they have money and they can start lending it out and they can make interest on it. And they don't lend it out directly. They lend it out through banks to help.
Yeah, that's an important thing because we're losing community banks all over the country, and especially since the crisis of 2008, we've lost about a third of them. So it used to be there were, I think, 8,000 plus community banks. Now there's around 5,000, and it's going down all the time. They either fail or they get absorbed into larger banks, and that's a problem because they don't. These larger banks don't serve the communities. They prefer to do a lot of derivatives and a lot of money management, wealth management, and things that don't have anything to do with the community. They don't like to make small loans. It's not. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of time. They don't have the local feel, so they just prefer to do things that are more profitable, and at least until they need to get bailed out.
A good way to think about a local bank versus a big bank is basically big banks are centralized.
Yeah.
And local banks are decentralized. And local banks, you get to know the banker. And local banks, they get to know the borrowers and the businesses. And with these big central banks, when you centralize things, they lose all of that. They lose all of that connection and they don't care. Yeah. And they don't have the ability to assess the risk factors either. That was one of the reasons in 2008 that there were all the problems. All this lending happened using algorithmic assessments that just didn't do the same job that a local banker could do in assessing people's ability to pay mortgages.
Yes.
Yeah, the big banks take much higher risk. If you look at their rate of failure, all 19 of the big banks that were bailed out, they all would have failed. And the small banks, well, they were allowed to fail, but they didn't fail at the same rate as all the big ones, and they all failed basically. So their risk profile is much higher, but they do it because they know they'll get bailed out.
Paul Craig Roberts, I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but one thing, he says we should be nationalizing these big banks. Don't rescue them anymore. Yeah. This whole idea that Mnuchin is keeping it a secret who got $500 billion in rescue, the guy should be going to jail. Mnuchin is on the list of people who Trump appointed who should be going to jail and being investigated. And if Biden comes up with this idea that we're going to look forward, not backwards like Obama did, I'm going to throw up.
Yeah. Always keep your barf bag with you.
We're talking politics.
On this flight. Hey, I have a question, sort of. Yeah. I've been thinking about a conflict that's going on. It seems to have lines being drawn. It seems to be people taking up sides in a pretty serious conflict. And I'm wondering what you all think, what your assessment is of this. Like, who are the belligerents? What are they think they're doing? And I mean, because is it a war? Is it a push for control of resources while things really start to get bad? Is it, what the heck is this thing that's going on that's showing up so much more clearly now that we're all forced to confront the pandemic? Does that make sense? Did you get the question?
Who are the parties involved in the conflict?
Yeah,
That's
Exactly.
what I'm asking. What do you think of this? I see a conflict going on, and it's ramping up, and the lines are being drawn.
What's the subject?
Yeah, you're being kind of obtuse. Get a little.
This is Katie Singer. I have a response. I'm seeing that there are people who are really oriented by, I have rights to make a living. I have rights to not wear a mask. I have rights to protect my family and only my family. And then there are people who say we're in a community situation and we need to respect the community is priority over individual rights. And there's definitely a line being drawn between those groups.
So somebody got the question. It's not that obtuse.
I thought you were going to mention the Black Lives Matter. And
That would fit in too.
What do you think? I'm not giving out with a lot of stuff here. I'm asking a question. Let's see what people really think.
Are you a psychotherapist?
I really appreciate the question. Thank
Question
you.
they do.
I really appreciate the question. It's really what I'd hoped we would talk about.
Can I try to?
I don't have answers to it. And if someone else wants to talk, go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh.
I don't have answers. I see a danger that if this revolution is defined too narrowly, it will not have the massive support that it needs, so that when Trump declares martial law, which seems inevitable to me, there will be resistance to that. If the movement divides us so that it remains.
Oh, we lost you. We
If
lost
the movement divides us so that it remains only about Black Lives Matter and there's no broader support, then once the crackdown comes, we won't be united in resisting the crackdown and we'll lose. We have to expand this to make it about larger issues.
I'm going to respond, Josh, because I think that they already tried to make it martial law. Trump did it in Washington, D.C., and his generals rebelled. Even his Secretary of Defense stood up to him. So Trump tried and he failed. And I think that this movement is massive and it's huge. I mean, I went to one protest and I would say it was somewhere between 90 and 95% Caucasian. There were very few blacks in it. I mean, this has brought together an awful lot of people. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Josh, but I had to stick my 2 cents in there.
No, not at all. I hope you're right.
May I ask a question about banking that relates to this idea that we're talking about community? When you talk about community banks, you're talking about things like credit unions. Is that right?
It can be, but there's other community banks which are just small local banks, and there's thousands of them.
All right. People who have any money put their money, as they always have it, in stocks, bonds, or real estate. People don't have savings accounts anymore.
Well, some do. A lot of, the stock market is mainly for very rich people. If you have stocks at all, most people just have it through 401ks and that kind of thing.
Or unions.
Or unions, yeah.
That's right. But then what is your targeted community for public banking?
Yeah, so the coalition now is basically a lot of activists who are looking for investment in their communities. They feel that, they haven't been able to get any banks to respond. They're being told, if they're being told anything, they're being told they're too big a credit risk, or they can't get loans to start stores, they can't get mortgages.
I understand that, but who is your targeted population?
It's basically the community that feels cut out of the banking system. A lot of people are unbanked.
Well, I get the feeling that these are not wealthy people.
Well, I mean, a lot of people can't afford the fees. You know, if you have too small an account, you get charged fees, and basically it's not a matter of collecting interest because there is no interest now. So you just are paying a lot of fees. So what's the point in having a bank? Or maybe they live paycheck to paycheck.
So
But-
this then relates to your definition of what a community is. Because if your definition of a community are people who don't have the money to invest in stocks, bonds, or real estate,
Yeah.
then you're dealing with a community of very powerless people.
Well, that's
I think
part of it.
your objective is to try-
The other part of it too is the actual political entities, the cities and towns themselves, because they're basically giving away this money to Wall Street to invest, so they don't have it themselves to invest. And what a public bank does is it can actually invest in community projects. They could build a bridge, they could build a road, or at least float a bond issue to do that, and at a lower interest rate.
Work around co-op.
Tom talks about that a lot too.
I've known
so-
economic development credit unions that worked very well.
It's
Because
not an economic development corporation. That's more of a granting institution, and that doesn't make loans and charge interest, and it doesn't.
economic
have
development
political
credit unions
leverage.
make loans. They make traditional standard loans into business enterprises as opposed to mortgages for houses. And one of the advantages of some of these economic development credit unions is that if the business runs into trouble, they can put together a committee of people to analyze the business to see why and how the trouble began and what could be done to save the business. And I've read stories of some economic development credit unions that have in fact saved businesses that might otherwise have collapsed.
Well, one of the problems with credit unions, which you probably know, is that it's restricted to the amount of money that the people who own money in the credit union put in. So it is literally a union of money that's put into the credit union to be loaned out. So they're finite in that sense. You know, a bank can actually leverage their deposits well, it's not strictly that way, but it looks like it's leveraging their deposits 9 to 1. That's not exactly what they do because it's really.
It works like a mutual insurance company, doesn't it?
No. Bank. Scott is right. Banks. That's the one thing that people don't quite understand. And you can say banks make money out of nothing, but they lend out, even though you're right, it's not exactly that way, but 10 times the deposit money they have. They do create money.
Yes.
They are the frontline creators of money. You know, not currency, but money. So that's what a bank can do that a credit union cannot do.
Right.
Now, what happens if there is actually what amounts to a civil war,
Then the
which
bank
is what some people seem to be working toward really hard with a lot of power?
I'm not sure there's two sides. Don't you need two sides for a civil war? I think there's 10 sides.
Well, there's been a lot of internecine conflicts in places like the Balkans with a lot of sides.
Yeah.
But I don't know what's going on, but I'm asking the question because it seems to me it's an issue that could sweep aside all this financial good work that you're trying to do if we don't address the larger
If there's a complete breakdown of society, then banks too will
Yeah,
go away.
right.
I'm still trying to work within the system.
A complete breakdown of society is something that I see as eminently possible, and it could happen very fast.
Well,
And
then
if
we're
you
back
all
to
wanted to,
barter.
go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I say then we'd be back to barter, Peter.
I'm not sure. I don't know what that means.
It means that if you go to the bank to get your money out, they won't give it to you.
Well, your money might not spend if it gets bad enough.
Yeah, the money is only has value because the government taxes it, and if there's no government, that money is just paper. It's useless. So,
It's also electronic, and if the electronics fail, it's gone.
but ultimately the value is because there's a government that says that you need it to pay taxes and also.
Sure, I mean, it's all by agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
And the question is it possible that the society agreement is going to collapse? And
there's already alternate currencies, which we actually don't oppose in the public banking movement. There's a whole, LETS, local exchange transaction systems,
yeah,
Berkshire Bucks and other things like that. But they're localized and they work. The government, when they allow them, they treat them as coupons so that they don't charge them with counterfeiting. That's a fine line to walk sometimes. Sometimes people do get in trouble for trying to promote alternate currencies and they do go to jail.
yeah, there's a lot of good work on alternative economies.
Yeah, but it proves that there's a need for it.
Yeah, and Howard Richards is an
it.
expert on that. But
Yeah,
if things get really bad very quickly, it'll all kind of be moot at that point. And I'm wondering about, what happens, how can we impact this? Like I see this looming calamity coming, and I trace it to basically the cost-benefit analysis that cuts out the common and the natural world and just borrows from that without any accounting. And now the accounts have come due. So
that gets a little bit into my other cause, the land value taxation, because in the classical economic definition, land is actually all of nature's resources. So we try to put a value on all of the resources and say that that's the foundation for all value, and not paper money or money at all, actually.
Well, and there's a value to the quality of life for people that live on the land, for example.
Yeah.
Is there a role for the insurance industry in what you're describing as public banking? If I wanted the entire nation to become vegan and vegetarians within 1 month, all I would have to do is have all the insurance companies put provisions in all of their policies, homeowners, comprehensive health insurance, all the policies that people have, and put provisions in those policies that everybody be a vegan vegetarian. It would happen overnight. The insurance industry is tantamount to a shadow government in this country. And when what you're describing is public banking, I think is something that you would have to relate to the insurance industry in some way to be effective.
Well, I disagree with that a little bit, because a lot of people aren't insured and they go through life on a chance, but they go through it somehow.
Well, most people have some form of insurance.
Well, a lot of people don't, especially health insurance now, especially with people being laid off.
Yeah, I would.
Plus 30 million.
I would want to see some stats supporting that claim. I mean, what kind? And there are so many different kinds of insurance too. I mean, you're talking car insurance, you're talking life insurance, you're talking homeowners insurance or apartment insurance. Or, yeah, well, but they're all different.
It's true, they're all different, but you could put provisions in each one of them that people would
the
have.
Zombies could be on the planet too. I mean, come on, you're getting speculative here. I mean, just like there's so many apocalyptic movies now. Everybody thinks about apocalypse. Everybody thinks about the end of the world. And I Walking Dead, I love it. Great show, but I just don't see it happening. I know there's this whole new world order idea that there are these nefarious, nasty people somewhere back there in somewhere influencing everybody, and it's going to cause there to be an authoritarian shutdown, and we're all going to lose our freedom. And I think there are a lot of genuine threats that are things that we can see. And those are the ones we need to deal with. I just can't get into looking at, all this science fiction stuff and fantasy stuff.
I agree.
We need to be dealing with what's real and what is existing. And not going off on the deep end about this stuff. I'm sorry,
Well,
people.
look at this present conversation, Rob. Now, I've been pushing out at the corners of it for something of a larger
I love
context.
pushing the envelope. So
And people have been, some people have made a good attempt to think in those terms. And then most of us, including me most of the time, kind of retreat into what we're familiar with. But you know what we're familiar with is how we got in this mess.
Well, if the economy didn't collapse in 2008, it won't today.
Josh, you know,
Can someone define what collapse would, what would collapse be?
When the dollar no longer has any value.
You can't get food, you can't get gas for your car, you can't buy new tires.
That's right.
There's
Yeah,
no
remember-
groceries in the
And guys,
store.
I've sure seen a lot of food lines in the last couple months.
There's no medical system. There's no educational system. There's no functioning
They closed
democracy.
schools. They shut down a lot of these corner clinics, and all they had left open were the hospitals and the emergency rooms. A friend of mine's an ER doctor, and he used to work at one of these handy corner clinics where you could just walk in. They shut it down. They just opened it again, but they shut down the clinics. They shut down the schools. I mean, so a lot of what you're describing has happened in the last couple months, which is reason to justify contemplating that the end might be near. I mean, and I don't blame people.
Contemplating that we might have a say in how it turns out.
But you know, I
We
went
can
down,
imagine it.
I went down to South Philly today, and went to Pat's Steaks, the most, that and Gino's,
I've been there.
the most famous steak sandwich places in the world, and it was like normal. Everybody was sitting out. You know, maybe 10% or less of the people were wearing masks, and it looked normal,
Deceptively so.
which was a little disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went biking today and everybody was out on the lawns and talking, and nobody was social distancing. So much so our governor is now yelling at people in New York City and saying we're threatening our recovery. But so far our numbers keep going down. So I think we're actually coming out of it. I think enough people have been infected and that the vulnerable people have gone through this. Some have died, but most have recovered. And so now it's going to be much tougher for the virus to take off again.
We don't know that.
That's,
We had an outbreak in Vermont that's up to 60 people in the last few days.
you know, but we had tens of thousands. We lost over 25,000 people in New York City alone, and had 200,000 people infected in the state.
And it's not necessarily the pandemic that causes the collapse. This is just one of the many tangled
True,
factors.
that's been the stressor lately, and it's pretty high.
And
But
it might
coming up.
actually help us wake up to this and start taking a hand.
So what would that look
We're
like?
having Zoom sessions. If something good came out of it.
So anybody who hasn't spoken yet, who have anything to say? Anything to ask? Jan?
Well, I spoke just a little bit. A couple of things I want to say. One is, you can see this background, it's reversed, but it shows the COVID, it's backward, but it has COVID, then the next wave is recession, and the next wave is climate change.
The writing's not backwards.
No, we can read it. Yeah.
Well, for me, it looks backwards. Huh, that's interesting. For me, it looks backwards. Well, anyway, I just thought that was relevant to what's happening, that, you know, COVID's bad, but the recession that comes from it, I think we need to social distance, but it's true the recession could do an awful lot of damage and could kill people. Although it is making the air cleaner. But the bigger challenge is climate change. So that's the, anyway, I just want to mention that. Another thing I wanted to say quickly
Good point.
was I noticed in OpEdNews there seem to be a lot of like Trump supporters, and it's good that you have multiple voices there. But some, they post articles. Some of the articles and some of the comments are pretty, pretty right wing.
Articles. Now, every now and then I'll post something right wing from Paul Craig Roberts, and I will add a comment, kind of trying to balance it out. And I always figure that the comments are where we balance that stuff out. It's where you kind of sharpen your tools for dealing with right wingers when they show up.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I'm just, I'm noticing that they're there. And sometimes they dominate. Sometimes they dominate the comments, and they often they get lots of likes. Like they say if I'm commenting, they respond with some right wing talking point. Then they get like eight likes. And I wonder, are they real likes, or do they have do they have multiple accounts?
Well, if you click on the number, you can see who liked them.
You can?
Take some comfort in the fact that sane people get tired of that and leave.
Maybe.
But it's usually the same small group of people.
Yeah, I wonder if they're real. But my point is, I wonder if maybe they're all the same people with different alt names. And if you looked at their IP addresses of who's commenting, I bet you would find that some of them are the same person.
But Don, just click on the number and you can see the names of the people who liked it.
Yeah, but the names might be.
This is a topic that Rob and I have disagreed about in the last week. I believe that trolls are real and that there's a widespread CIA paid network of paid people to disrupt sites like ours. And they're paid to do it full time.
I don't know.
Well, there's machines that do a lot more efficient work of that nature. And a lot of those are zombies because they got set off and nobody knows where they are or how to stop them. So they're just kind of these bots rolling around in the net. We get these phone calls every day
I don't know
about
if
our car warranty.
Some sort of Republican group. And I posted in the chat saying something about the scary article about that Wikipedia, according to Gray Zone and Max Blumenthal. Wikipedia was taken over by the leaders of our neocons and libertarians. That Wikipedia now, a lot of progressive content is being edited out I've noticed that too. I write some articles there. I contribute to articles, and sometimes what I write is edited away. Somebody else challenges what I wrote, and they delete it.
Well,
sometimes the response to the abortion argument is useful here. If you don't believe in abortion, don't have one.
So what's that? I don't understand how that applies.
I mean, because where are you going with this? How are you going to deal with what you're talking about effectively? You're saying there's nothing you can do about it.
I've had some experience with Wikipedia. Wikipedia, somebody put up an OpEdNews page, and then some right-wing Wikipedian who had a list of pages that he was going to attack, most of them progressive, he got it taken down. So I started learning more about Wikipedia and looking at the history pages and the comment pages. Every page, besides having a regular page, has a history page and a discussion page. And you can look at all that stuff and you can see who are the actual people working on it. And so I was able to look and see who got it to be taken down and what else he was targeting. And I found some friendly people, and I asked them for some help, and they helped, and they got the page reinstated strong enough so it'll never be taken down.
Yeah, I wrote a page for World Beyond War, David Swanson's group.
Oh, good.
And somebody challenged the page, saying this organization is not legitimate, doesn't have enough primary sources. I did have primary source there. It was clearly somebody trying to attack it. So now we're trying to defend that page from somebody who says it's not legitimate.
Well, but there's a lot of people, that's how they get their jollies, is attacking other pages. And you have to just find all the supporting material that goes into making a page strong. And that means having notable sources that refer to it and putting all that together. I mean, you probably know that already. Yeah, but that's how it's done. I mean, for the rest of you, I mean, Caroline, you're interested in getting set up with a Wikipedia page, and maybe Don, you can help a little with this. But Wikipedia, I mean, if you go to the Monsanto page, Monsanto people are the saints of the planet and they do nothing wrong. And anybody who tries to put up anything else gets it pulled down. And that's the case for an awful lot of the political content on Wikipedia. And I think that Blumenthal is probably right, that, you know, there's a group of people there. And if it turns out that the founder of Wikipedia is a libertarian, then I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of libertarians are on there wreaking havoc among a supposedly unbiased worldwide encyclopedia.
Well, Monsanto's going to have a department devoted to Wikipedia. Get real.
Yeah, and funding for academics who defend.
Yeah, they'll fund a chair in some eminent institution.
But it's coming to what Trump is saying about fake news.
This article in Gray Zone says that, you know, some large corporations fund Wikipedia, and the CEO is some sort of libertarian.
I'm too close to the grave to worry about that one, I think.
Oh, stop that stuff, Peter. There you go. You're doing it again. Are you ill?
I paid some dues, man.
Yeah. All right. These are good.
Well, you look healthy, Peter.
I'm
And
glad to hear
your
it.
thinking is very strong. Your mind is in first-class condition. And that's very important to keep
Thank
you going. How old are you, if I may ask?
I think I'm 72.
Yeah, well, I'm older than you.
Well, then
You're
I
just
will
a
defer
kid.
to your
Yeah, you're
superior
absolutely
wisdom.
a kid.
I was just looking on Facebook. A friend had posted something that said one of the big main causes of injuries in older men is thinking they're younger.
Yeah, I go along with that.
But then a friend of mine wrote a book, and I love the title of the book. It's "Don't Let an Old Person Move Into Your Body."
That's cool.
That's great. That's great.
What's the alternative? How do you stop an old person from moving in?
You marry a
Mine.
Brazilian beauty. Go to the beach whenever she wants.
You
know
don't
what?
have a young attitude. You don't let yourself. I mean, look, when I think when my parents were in their 50s, they felt older than, well, that generation felt older than I feel now when I'm turning 69 this month. I mean, I think it's partly attitude. It's an attitude about what you can do and what kind of health you expect to have. I think.
And so 60 is the new 50, 70 is the new 60, 80 is the new 70, and dead is the new 80.
Before you arrived, I think that Rob had already done a different math on that. 69 is the new 39.
That's it. Yes.
Don't take off just 10 years. Take off 20 at least.
You're right. You're right.
That's 30 years.
30,
Yes.
that's 30.
I play racquetball when the gym's open. I play racquetball with guys in their 20s, and I beat them sometimes. And that feels so good. Young whippersnappers.
That's funny.
So Peter, did you get any closer to understanding the line in the sand you're talking about?
The line in the sand.
I'm hearing a lot of fascinating stuff. But, you know, pursuant to the talk about old guys acting young, I could share my screen with you. Let me see if that works. Nope, I can't.
Rob can do it.
What are you trying to do?
I want to show you a video of me acting young.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh, don't bother.
Is this triple X rated?
Oh,
I think educated people today are eating better. People are.
I think that has a lot to do with it.
Nutrition has everything to do with it. Yes.
Yeah. And everybody in my parents' generation drank like, as if they were Irish or something. They all drank heavily.
And the processed food, the big new technology then was frozen
Right.
beers,
Frozen food, yeah.
aluminum plates there.
Yeah.
Maybe just our eyesight is bad and we don't realize how bad we look.
Don't tell me.
I have several stepchildren who look older than me. And they're not that much younger, 10 or 15 years, but they all live in Louisiana and they all eat, hamburgers and French fries. I mean the last time I had a hamburger was probably, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And and I didn't even like it then. But the kind of stuff that they think is normal groceries, if they came home from the grocery store with $200 worth of groceries that they would think was the best groceries they could get, there would not be a single thing in there that I would be willing to eat.
That's right. I agree. When I see what people check out of the supermarket with, there are no vegetables,
Right.
no grains. It's just all processed food of one sort or another.
Right.
Hugh, you may be pleased to know that I have been a vegetarian for 25 years.
40.
Maybe more. All right.
1980.
Could be 30.
Of course, I'm older than you.
I've been 40 years too as a vegetarian.
Yeah, me too. 50 years.
Interesting.
Oh.
I am not. I tried. I'm not. I do. If I eat meat, I try to get it organic, but I do eat meat.
Okay, I can show you what I do to stay healthy. Let me see if this works.
Well, you were eating cheese
Can you
when
see
we all
this?
got together.
Apparently you're not vegan.
Check this out.
That's you jumping?
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
Is that recent?
Endo.
yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, cut the old crap with us.
Right.
Pretty cool, Peter. Was Yoda there?
Yeah, that's what I was expecting.
What is that exactly? It looks like a martial art.
That is the ancient Japanese art of kenjutsu, which is swordsmanship.
Wow.
And
very cool.
And the idea is not to hurt each other.
Well, the idea is not to hurt yourself.
Do you go to a gym and lift weights and do sit-ups and that sort of thing?
Sure. Whatever floats your boat.
Well, does it float your boat?
No, weightlifting, no. I never do it.
You don't look overweight.
Hmm?
You don't look overweight.
No, well, it's a very active art, kenjutsu. Not to say aerobic. But
I can highly recommend carpentry as a healthy lifestyle. It gives you lots of exercise, and you can never afford to retire, so you do it until you die, and it's, keeps you fit.
And anybody can bang a straight nail.
You build houses and renovate houses?
Yeah.
But it takes a carpenter to bang a crooked nail straight.
That's a carpenter on some kind of medication or something.
We need a carpenter who can straighten out crooked people.
Yeah, there you go.
I do that too. That's my sideline.
There was a carpenter once that tried to do that.
Yeah, look what happened to him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I was born on his birthday too. I guess it's.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
His alleged birthday.
Yeah.
Right. It's another discussion. But I want to understand. I'm not totally clear on Peter's question. Katie got it, but I'm not sure that I totally understand. So it's the it's the COVID's real and we really have to honor everything that's being demanded of us, as opposed to those who just want to go back to quote unquote normal?
I just posted something on OpEdNews that deals with this, and I just briefly, I trace it down to a argument between whether we're responsible for other people or not.
Okay.
And, you know, on one side, people say, well, the economy is more important. And on the other side, they say, well, but people are more important. And I come down saying, in the end, the economy is the same thing as the common. Any economy that doesn't account for the common ain't the economy.
Yeah. I just had that discussion with clients I'm working for. Wonderful people treating me so kindly and appreciatively and full of gratitude. And they seem to have endless resources, but they're clearly libertarians. They're taking care of themselves and they're moving south because they think there's a better chance of growing food in the south. They do anticipate a collapse, but they're clearly, take care of me, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And that's where I have a divide with them.
Well, the reason it applies in the COVID situation in my town is that you go into the gas station and everybody's wearing a mask and you're about to go out, somebody comes in the door and holds the door for you and he's not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So you're going to get right up within 6 inches of this guy going through the door because he's being polite.
Right.
And I say, come on in or go out and I'll use the door when you're done. You know? So, but it's not, you know, wearing a mask isn't any good for protecting you. It protects the people around you.
Right.
I don't get into an elevator if there's more than one other person in it.
Yeah, right. But that's to protect other people. There
There's
really
a way-
isn't much protection for oneself in this pandemic.
I read more recent articles that say that masks can also protect you.
There is a
Well-
way to hold the door for someone without getting too close to them. Depends. You can stand behind the door as they walk through it. You don't want to be on the side where they walk through. I hold doors for people. That's one of my things. But I don't get close enough. And I don't inhale while they're close to me.
In
No,
Asia,
You know,
breathing is a big
airborne is suspended in the air. Somebody flushes a toilet. There's airborne virus. There's nothing to do about that. The ventilation systems in public bathrooms don't handle it. So it's all
in
about
Asia,
protecting other people from your breath.
in Asia, this is a completely different situation, partly because they have dictatorships, but also because the community comes before the individual. And so when they say, okay, we're shutting everything down to stop the virus, it's not a question. In this culture, we have conflict. So that's one example of the conflict that Peter was asking about earlier. Just, I see so many conflicts. I can also say, as a person who doesn't have fun, like I don't have money, and another place in the banking situation, a lot of people who are expecting a pension, their money is in the stock market. So, and then there are those of us who have no pension coming, you know, possibly even no Social Security coming. And that's, I don't even know if it's a conflict. When you're talking about public banking, I just feel like I'm not included in that because I don't have any money and I don't have any pension. So there, I'm still with Peter's question and seeing so many places of conflict.
It's not the way it works. It's a community or city or state or county bank. It's not actually, even though it says public, it's not for people walking in and creating accounts. It really holds the political entities' money. You know, for example, the Bank of North Dakota keeps all of the state tax revenue money in itself. There's only one actual building, and it's not where people in the public would actually go in and create deposits. And 97% of its deposit is just state money. So when they get in behind a loan, they're actually helping the community banks in the state. And by the way, North Dakota has the highest per capita number of community banks. They're actually helping those banks to make loans to people in the state, so that that state has a lot of community banks that are helping local people like yourself start businesses or keep deposits and savings accounts.
I don't want to start a business. I'm not a business person.
Yeah, but
I'm
you left
a
out-
writer. But
you left
anyway,
out
that's
the important part, Scott, and that is that the public bank makes money. And the public bank, if it's owned by the state or the city or the county, can use that money to pay for things. So Katie, if you have benefits that come to you from being in a community, in a city or a town, then a public bank could help to pay for those benefits. And it might help you to have less taxes or get more benefits. So you don't have to be a business.
don't own any property.
Doesn't matter.
No, but you know, where I live during this situation, a lot of concern about people who are in your position. And there are food banks and there are people delivering food and there are people knocking on doors to see if people are all right. So there's a certain amount of solidarity here. What Scott is talking about is a way to really get the Wall Street drain out of the system so that a state or a municipality can take care of the public when it needs it. But it's still insufficient. It's not a solidarity economy.
You know, I
But
know a
it's a
guy.
step toward
Yeah,
one. It's a better.
Yeah, it's a small step in the right direction.
I knew a guy many years ago who said, if you can't be wealthy, be absolutely poor, totally broke, not owning 2 pennies. Because when you're flat broke, you're eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. You get a minimum amount of Social Security. You're eligible for health care, you know, and welfare. All your needs are basically.
I don't know if
But
that's
it's not the kind of health care I would want or wish on anybody.
It's actually not true anymore.
Yeah, it's, that's this wealthy, arrogant, elitist thinking that I'm sorry, I don't buy.
Yeah, we take care of the poor. That's baloney.
Yeah.
They go off the end of the shelf, they go homeless, and they get chased out of town.
And Trump is going to cut Social Security and Medicare anyway. He already said that in the next term if he gets reelected.
That's true.
It's funny, Chomsky said something really interesting the other day. He said, I think the country is resilient enough to withstand a narcissistic megalomaniac fascist. I think that was his words.
When did he say that?
A couple of weeks ago,
Oh my God.
if my analysis of the transcript is correct.
For another 4 years, even for another 4 years.
Another
Yeah, he was saying that's really not what's going to kill us. But then he did go on to point out that there is a massive amount of damage being done.
Yes.
And I have on the public banking thing, I wanted to ask Scott how, what's the relationship between establishing, let's say, state banks and nationalizing the Fed, or basically, getting rid of it and reinstating the U.S. Treasury?
Yeah, so we talk about that quite a bit in the in the Google group that Public Banking Institute has. There's probably about 100 people in that on and off. It's not a direct mission. I do know that the founder, Ellen Brown, who I've met a few times, and Rob has too, she is in favor of that in a sense, but she feels that that's not feasible. It's a Washington federal issue. Public banks are basically a state and city issue, local issue. Although a lot of people would like, including me, to go to a national currency that's provided by the Treasury, like United States notes, I'm basically a greenbacker, like Abraham Lincoln.
And the Kennedys.
And well, maybe there's some dispute about that one, or Henry George for that matter. But it doesn't look like we're going there anytime soon. And they're putting $2.5 trillion into basically resuscitating the banks again, and all of these big corporations. That's not the direction they're heading. We have to get a different administration.
Well, at the time of Andrew Jackson, there was the debate over whether to have a United States bank or not. And Jackson was opposed to it. And he was opposed to it because he felt that a national bank just protected the interests of the wealthy. And that is how it has turned. That's how the Federal Reserve turned out.
This is Katie again. If I'm going to interject, I keep seeing that international supply chains have fallen apart with the virus. And the good news is that people have become much more aware of our dependence on international supply chains. And if we're aiming to strengthen local supply chains, and let's say public banking would do that, well, that's going to cut out an awful lot of what we expect in daily life. So, for example, and I know telecommunication stuff, but in one smartphone, there are more than 1,000 substances, and each has its own energy-intensive, toxic waste-emitting supply chain, from multiple, the substances come from multiple continents. And so everybody, not everybody, but most people want a smartphone. They want the internet, the infrastructure that telecommunications requires. But we're not going to, as things collapse already, we can't depend on that stuff. So I think we need to start imagining what is realistic and possible without an international global super factory running our lives. Call it a corporation.
If you don't deal with the contextual aspect of the economy, which is called your food depends on investor confidence, or you don't eat, then everything that happens is going to result in the same thing in the end, no matter who's the president or how the banks are structured.
Can you explain that for a kindergartner, which I am in terms of economics?
Yeah, you won't get a job that's decent, that pays you decent money, unless somebody else makes money from that. You're selling your labor, and your labor isn't worth enough for you to get a decent rate of pay. That's the way the system is presently set up.
So then I'm a writer, and I have proudly said that I'm probably one of our country's best paid writers, and my average income has hovered around $10,000 a year for most of my adult life. So somehow I am supported, but it's not by this economic system. I can't recommend my situation to anybody, but I have experience in surviving without, expected participation or expected income for the work I do.
Well, but you have to have participation because people have to read your stuff.
They don't necessarily.
And then you don't get paid, right?
Well, even if they do, I don't get paid. I've not been paid for my last 3 books.
Oh, well, so case in point, if somebody doesn't make money on whatever it is you sell, they ain't going to buy it, and you ain't going to eat.
Yeah, but what Katie is saying is she's surviving. She's not looking at that model.
That model hasn't worked for me.
Kate either.
Pardon? What?
You may not be participating in that model, but that model is not participating in you either in that case, and good luck. You know, you might
Thank
be.
you. Thank you. What I'm saying is that I think there are things to learn from how I've survived, because somehow I just do. But I don't have any kind of predictable income. I've never had that. I'm 60 years old.
I got that. And you're probably doing better than most people in your situation, but how are you going to teach 7 billion people what you know?
Yeah, that's a conflict again, because the only way to reach people now is online, and I have tremendous resistance to that form.
Well,
Mine's
fortunately, you're
actually-
not the only person thinking this stuff up, or we'd really be in trouble.
It's useful to study the history of the Quakers. The Quakers developed an internal economy. You always read about the Quakers traveling. Well, what they were doing in traveling was they were either delivering orders or picking up orders from one Quaker community after another. And anything that they sold outside of the community was extra. There's a principle in economics that if you could recirculate a dollar within a community more than 3 times, you know, I produce something and I sell it to you, and then that dollar I hire an accountant to, you know, do my books, and I keep that money within our community. The wealth of that community will expand exponentially. And you know, when we began this discussion, we started to talk about communities, but we were talking about it through the concept of public banking, but we could talk about communities as self-contained economic systems. And the Quakers achieved that. No other group, to my knowledge, achieved that in this country.
Actually, that's the way humans existed before civilization. That's the way they all survived, by living together. And their mentality was, how will my behavior affect everybody in my band? Because they weren't even in tribes, they were in small bands. And
I
so,
once heard a definition of community, that it's a group of people whose survival depends on each other.
I like that. I like that.
The Quakers held slaves too.
Oh, well, early on, but they quickly, that's not a fair criticism.
That wasn't
they
quick.
got rid of their
It took
slaves
John
very
Woolman
early.
all his life.
That's not a fair criticism.
Anyway, guys, we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes, and I said we were going to go till 9:30, and we're already past that. And I was out in the sun a lot today, and I'm really beat. So we've got to call it a night. I hate to do it.
Okay. Thank you very
Jan,
much.
you didn't have a chance to say anything, I don't think. If you got anything you want to say, and Liam, Liam, you spoke. But Jan, you
No, I had plenty to say. Yeah.
you good?
Marta didn't
I
say,
learned a lot about public banking. I didn't know. It's quite interesting. Yeah, so I'm going to read up on that.
Yeah, I've got some interviews with Ellen and others about public banking on my podcast page. Yeah, Marta, you have anything to say?
Unmute.
I found
Go ahead,
Scott's
Marta.
book on his
I
website.
have to unmute. Okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You're ready.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. So I'm just disgusted about the elections in Georgia, and they just bought those new express vote machines, and none of them were working, and they're a piece of junk, and they're 10 times as expensive as optical scanners. And a lot of people are saying that's a preview of what's going to happen in November. And they're still militating against mail-in ballots, and there are an awful lot of ways they can corrupt that system too. So I'm just hoping against hope that enough people show up and enough activists are there to protect them, and there's something to do about those horrible bugs he's training to bully people at the polls.
Well, I'll tell you, I had a vote in Pennsylvania, and I just decided I'm going to go to the polls and vote. And I did. I didn't want to send it in. I just wanted to go. So anyway, but we've got to run. gotta run, and let's see you again next week. Katie, you have something final you want to?
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye. Have a good
Good
week.
night. Goodbye.